Well, I began Wednesday morning crying tears of joy at my breakfast table. I don't know about all of you. We had just received the news from Georgia as we ate breakfast in the tennis level household. And I cried with hope and with relief and with admiration for all of the people who worked so hard to overcome the historic voter suppression in Georgia and make sure that Black and Brown voices were heard in that election. And gratitude for Stacey Abrams and many of the other Black organizers, particularly Black women, who worked so hard to create such an incredible thing. I wept with relief that so many of those that I love and the baby I'm carrying inside me will have an easier time with the next set of political leaders coming up in this next couple of years. We had on our to-do list to paint the baby's room that day, and so we read the news and finished our breakfast and then went upstairs and began to paint. I vaguely knew that there was some sort of Make America Great Again rally or white supremacist rally that was going to be happening in DC because I had been following the news of what the Proud Boys did the last time they were in town, but I wasn't really focusing on it until Wednesday afternoon when all of a sudden I took a break from painting and saw frantic text messages from family and from colleagues across faith traditions letting me know about the assault on the Capitol, that the horrors that were happening as we looked at the news. And I know many of you were also looking at the news at that time in horror. My colleagues and I, my clergy colleagues and I were asking ourselves, what can we do? What is there to do? And we planned a prayer vigil for Wednesday night. I know many of you were there with the Power Prayer Vigil. We talked about statements that we could make. We talked about public spiritual practices we could take on. Those congregations who have church bells began to ring their church bells. We talked about whether we should plan to go to Harrisburg on Thursday or to go to DC. And the answer was a clear no, because Black Lives Matter DC and other progressive organizations had been very clear in encouraging people to stay away from the rally and instead use their time to stay safe because of the threat of violence, because of the threat of people trying to smuggle guns in, because of the threat of COVID, and knowing that it wasn't going to be a productive space to do protests and counter protests, that the advice was just to stay away, stay at home, and use your voice for justice in other ways. And so I sat at home and I watched live streams from some of the people who had broken into the Capitol. I don't know if any of you were watching live streams or what kind of news sources you were looking at the time. But I saw that it was a largely white and largely male crowd. I watched on the live stream that I watched some of the Capitol Police shake hands with some of the rioters. I heard stories of some of them taking selfies with rioters, but mostly they looked just kind of overrun. I read about nooses being hung on the Capitol grounds, and we heard chanting of something Mike Pence, and later found out that there was, I think, chanting both of where's Mike Pence, trying to find him, and then hang Mike Pence. Wednesday night, I prayed with my colleagues across faith traditions and with many of you in our online vigil. And then Thursday came and there was more clarity from the news. We learned of the woman who died from the Capitol Police shooting and the three others who died from medical emergencies during the riots. We learned of the police officer who died from his injuries sustained by the rioters. And I looked to see how many people had been arrested because clearly hundreds of people had stormed the Capitol. But there weren't that many arrests, at least not yet. And most of the ones that had been arrested were for violating curfew, which means that they were arrested after the Capitol had been resecured. Just a small number of people were arrested for being in the building. Most of them were allowed to leave. And on Thursday, I also read the news that 4,000 people had died from COVID-19 on Wednesday alone in the United States, while we were all watching the assault on the Capitol. The worst single day of death from COVID-19 happened. And I don't know about all of you. I've been struggling with feelings of shock and dismay, feelings of a almost deeper and almost more disturbing kind of lack of surprise, too. And I don't know if that came from watching tanks roll down a street near my house as I was tear gassed by just by being a bystander in a Black neighborhood during the George Floyd protests this summer, or watching the news of armed white gangs of men roaming streets in other neighborhoods in the same week being high-fived by the police. It didn't really surprise me that the Capitol Police weren't prepared properly. It seemed like best case scenario that they just hadn't planned well enough and were overrun, probably due to assumptions that a mostly white conservative crowd would have been orderly and supportive of them. Or worst case scenario, that they just willingly allowed the crowd into the building and cheered them on. I think more than anything, I've been struggling with feeling powerless. Have you all been struggling with feeling powerless in the face of this enormous thing? Yeah. There was this clear call not to go into the streets. Yes, right. There's this clear call that we don't go into the streets. And many of us haven't been able to do that because of COVID anyway, or other reasons that is not a safe choice for us. And the ability to affect change at the level needed to stop something like what happened on Wednesday is so enormous. It felt so far beyond me. Even the public calls, even using my voice as a clergy person, my pulpit, to call for Trump's impeachment felt anemic and weak coming from my lips. I felt powerless. And I have been sitting for the past few days, sitting here in my powerlessness, watching things unfold. And I fall prey very often when I feel powerless to the normal things that many of us do when we feel powerless or helpless, which is distracting ourselves, obsessing over watching the news, or facing into the real serious feelings of powerlessness. I would say that I did a better job of distracting and obsessing this week than I did of facing into the stillness. My particular brand of distraction that I found most helpful was watching and laughing at like the funny memes that came out on social media. I'm going to share one of them with you, just to have one joke today, which, in case you haven't seen it, I thought was funny. Is that it's not really a coup unless it's from the coup d'etat region in France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling white supremacy. These are the kinds of things the kinds of gloomy humor that I dedicated myself to as I watched, as I obsessed over the news over the past few days. And I had a lot of trouble facing into this stillness, facing into my own helplessness in the face of such a massive, massive, horrific event. But now it's Sunday, right? So that was Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday. And now it's Sunday. And I know many of you, and I know that you don't need me to tell you what you already know, what you've already been reading about and talking with each other about and posting on social media yourselves, that the assault on the Capitol was abhorrent and it was wrong. And more than anything else, it was about maintaining a legacy of white power in this country. You don't need me to tell you that the president inciting his mob to violence and destruction in the name of his own ego was a shockingly irresponsible act, because it was hardly surprising coming from 4 shockingly irresponsible years of presidency. And you don't need me to tell you that the police response to the largely white conservative rioters throws into even starker relief the injustice of the treatment of largely black and brown people and racial justice protesters in our country by the police in particular. And I don't even think you need me to say that we all need to recommit ourselves anew to using our power to dismantle racism and patriarchy and disinformation and hatred and all that undergirded Wednesday's actions, and that we need to hold our leaders accountable for doing the same. It's Sunday now, and our work is how to figure out how to integrate the experiences of this week into our souls, into our lifelong quests for wholeness, into our long-term task of building spiritual resiliency for the work of love and justice in our lives and in the world. It's Sunday, and if you're anything like me, you are probably still feeling that chaos and fear and fury and helplessness rattling around inside of you, battling each other inside of you in your imperfect and miraculous soul. Poet and Christian minister Jan Richardson writes in her poem, Blessing in the Chaos, "To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim on you, that have made their home in you, that go with you even to the holy places, but will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with wholeness or feel the grace that fashioned you. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you in its cage. Let there be an opening into quiet that lies beneath the chaos, where you find the peace that you did not think possible and see what shimmers within the storm. To all that is chaotic in you, let there come silence." It can feel wrong to choose stillness or try to focus on stillness when it feels like the world is on fire around us, right? Or when the world is in uproar. It feels like we have to be in uproar with it. But stillness is and has always been an important part of movements for justice. And so that's what I'm trying to tell myself and remind myself and focus on this week. In her book, Joy Unspeakable, Contemplative Practices of the Black Church, Reverend Dr. Barbara Holmes writes, "The activism that ignited the freedom movements, the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, had contemplative practices at their center. The very act of passive resistance, so nonviolent resistance, can be described as stillness in the midst of turmoil," she writes. You cannot face German shepherds and fire hoses with your own resources. There must be God and stillness at the very center of your being. Otherwise, you will spiral into the violence that threatens you. The civil rights movement had contemplative practices at its very center because we can't face all of the chaos in the world and all of the chaos that threatens us with our own resources alone. We need stillness and holiness at our very center. Otherwise, we will spiral into the violence that threatens us. I was rereading my first experience with silent retreats, which I went on my first silent retreat about 10 years ago. And I was rereading some of the journal entries that I wrote during that time and some of the pamphlets that the monks gave me at this abbey in Oregon that I spent time at. And there's a little pamphlet. It's an orange, like typed on a typewriter kind of pamphlet that says invitation to enter into quietude. And in this little pamphlet, it says that entering into quietude is not a cop out, but it's choosing a state of receptivity. So it's not absenting ourselves from that which is important. It's choosing to be receptive. That though we may feel guilty for doing nothing when we choose to focus in on our stillness, or though we may want to work hard to reach a place of holy connection, of deeper stillness, we want to work for it, that though we may feel our worth through being useful, that actually it's about getting still that allows that to change for us. I spent, I did some spiritual direction with I think he was like a 78-year-old monk named Brother Mark at the time. And he told me that grief and all of our unprocessed emotions and all of our old stories and all of our judging voices come out when we take time to be silent and to be still. And so I just reread my journal entries from that time. And in the first part of my silent retreat, I wrote so many words and it was all chaos. It was all about the decisions I was making. I had just begun seminary at the time and was trying to decide what my path was going to be in my career. I was wrestling with decisions. I was wrestling with questions around relationships. I spent a lot of time criticizing myself. I even spent a lot of time criticizing and questioning how I was spending my silent retreat. Like, should I be meditating more? Should I be reading more? Should I be going for more walks? Should I be journaling more? Why do I want so many cookies when I'm here? There was so much criticism and judgment and just chaos in the words that I was writing. And as the time went on, I began to write fewer words and have more clarity. I eventually became more quiet, more clear. And I remember as I left that silent retreat, the number of words in each sentence that I used seemed to be about halved. I just didn't need to use as many words. And I felt so much more at peace and in touch with what mattered most just by taking a few days to intentionally quiet myself. The objective of becoming quiet, of becoming receptive, according to my little yellow pamphlet and my own experience, is not to better plug into the holy, but it's really about being open to letting the holy plug into us. When we are quiet, we allow our inner self to surface, to take a forward seat. And it's in this inner self that we encounter the holy most profoundly, whether you define that as being in touch with God or some other higher power, or if it's simply being in touch with the deepest wisdom within each one of us. You cannot face German shepherds and fire hoses with your own resources. There must be God and stillness at the very center of your being, Barbara Holmes writes. Otherwise, you will spiral into the violence that threatens you. My friends, we cannot face coup attempts or white supremacist violence, or even just the important essential work of repairing democracy that is ahead of us with just our own resources. We need stillness at our center. We need to be in touch with our deepest wisdom to find our way forward. Otherwise, we will spiral into all that threatens us. So this week, it was so wonderful to see so many of your spiritual practices that you typed into the chat when Phyllis asked earlier. I invite you to find a way into stillness for yourself, whether that's through cuddling your cats on the front porch, or journaling, or going for a walk, or meditating. Find a way, whatever way you enter stillness best, to get in touch with your deepest wisdom, because we are going to need every one of us to have that core activated. We're going to need the best wisdom of every single one of us as we move forward and repair our democracy. May it be so, my friends, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.